executive committee member of the Center for South Asian Studies, Monica Ghosh, and I will be introducing our next speaker who served on the executive committee just, was it last year, Ashok? And Ashok Das, who is a professor in the Department of Urban and Regional Planning at the University of Hawaii and the College of Social Sciences. He is the chair of his department and teaches a wide range of courses for the department, including planning theory and history, planning in Asia, research design, urbanization, and globalization. Prior to coming to this department at UAH, he was the assistant professor at the Department of Urban Studies and Planning, San Francisco State University. He started universities in Thailand, Indonesia, Bangladesh. Broadly, Ashok's research explores institutional challenges to and innovations in ameliorating urban poverty through the provision of services in developing countries, especially in Southeast and South Asia. It's unrelated to the thing he's going to give, but basically Ashok is going to share with you his design background as an architect at Delhi University, which is where he got his architecture degree, before he moved into urban and regional planning. And through his architecture degree and his design sense, he developed what he's going to share with you next, the banner for the Center for South Asian Studies.
Yeah, we've been bannerless for a long time.
Bannerless Ashok designer.
I think I'm audible. So thank you very much, Monica. Thank you everyone for. So this is slightly a non-academic digression from this very enriching, deeply engaging academic symposium. So I hope it will be a good release for all of you. So anyway, so to give you some background, so my like Monica said, so my initial training was in architecture. I studied at the School of Planning and Architecture in Delhi. And then while I was still a student, I got a chance to, and I used to draw and paint from a very young age. So that was sort of an inborn talent I had, which my parents discovered. And they discovered very early on that the only thing that could keep me sitting in one place for more than 10 minutes. And even as a child of like 9 years or 10 years, I could go on for like 8 or 9 hours without getting up from the. So my mother was very, thankful. Whatever the higher powers she prayed to that. I had anyway. So the point is, so often, so I actually started working as I also started working as a cartoonist and illustrator for what was then the main architecture magazine in India called Architecture Plus Design Plus D. So then, so I did a lot of illustrations and other kind of work. So I have a very strong interest in design, but I don't get to do it in my regular work. So whenever I get a chance, it's very good. So this actually conversation was started by the former director, Anna Stur, when she asked me like, will you be able to draw something? And she had a very nice photograph on our website, which was about these 3 windows. I believe they were from Little India in Singapore. Very colorful. So that always was the back of my mind. Then again, when Nandini became the director, she said, by the way, we have some time, can we make this? I said, yeah, it took me longer than what I had promised, but I said, okay. And I'll try to do this. And the concept, so that's what I'm going to present. So this is one of the iterations of the logo that you have anyway. So anyway, so for those of you, I guess if you're not introduced to the map, for anyone who's less familiar with South Asia, it's a huge region. One of the oldest, most continuously inhabited regions of the world, with some of the world's most, largest and oldest civilization. So it stretches all the way from Afghanistan to Myanmar. So one would even argue that even Myanmar was part of South Asia, but officially now it's part of ASEAN, the Southeast Asian nations thing. So it's over there, right? So we actually had dinner at a Burmese restaurant last night, for the some of the attendance here. So anyway, so this is so my aim was in this design was to convey South Asia's unique nature. I didn't want to present this, by the way, just to make it clear, right? But I think Nandini insisted that no, you should come and give a small presentation, right? Hence, I'm doing this just to be clear, right? So just in case you think I've got some egotistical. Okay. So the concept was that I wanted to, but I'm very proud of the fact that this region is so pluralistic, despite all the not so encouraging trends that are underway in that region. I think it still is very resilient and it can overcome those. So that's why it's sort of salient and relevant to the geopolitical sort of situation today in general. And there's a very, what I call like a very palimpsestic history. There's so many layers wherever you go, so it's very interesting to, so I wanted to somehow show that, right? So anyway, so this led to the prediction. So it's distorted, by the way, because it's stretched onto two screens, so the ratio is like twice of what it should be in the longer dimension, right? Lengthwise. So anyway, so there are this thing. So the inspiration was from, my inspiration was the windows which are represented, windows in like buildings, and I have an architecture background, as you know, represented the region's traditional architectural styles. Yeah, so this was the main thing. And again, the windows thing, initially the seed was from Anna's photograph from Singapore, right? So why windows? So the concept is like windows let the outside, not in the US, not in these buildings in the US, which are probably the worst examples of windows, right? They let the outside enrich and transform the experience inside while maintaining its integrity. I mean, you're still inside, but you can control it and you can look outside more than others can look inside. So that's a very interesting thing, right? Then it's also, I'm using it as a metaphor for the free flow of knowledge and the exchange of ideas. It's apt for an institution for research and interdisciplinary discourse such as Center for South Asian Studies. Now why windows? And why windows from what is vernacular architecture? So many vernacular architectures in a region like South Asia, right? Because I think traditional architecture is the most tangible, most visible, most appreciable kind of manifestation of culture in general. Then windows and doors are also the most distinguishing and expressive features of any sort of structure, more than walls, more than roofs, more than ceilings, more than floors, right? So that's why you'll find usually intricately, designed and carved and crafted doors and windows. And it's also very intensely local vernacular architecture because it's shaped by the needs, climate, materials, traditions, and beliefs of the place where it is. So anyway, so there are 4 layers, Center for South Asian Studies. So the first one represents what is called the Mughal Jali. So the Mughals were so we have many historians here, so I'm going to refer to them. So it was one of the longest sort of ruling dynasties that also contributed a lot to the architecture and culture, literature. This was right before sort of the British took control of South Asia in a way, right? So they were there for a few hundred years before that. So the Mughal Jali also, so the Jali itself, Jali is basically a lattice or a perforated screen, but the Jali predates Mughal, arrival in India because it was a feature of Hindu, Jain, and Islamic architectures for long before, even millennia before that. At least for about a 2,000-year period, there have been Jalis which are quite intricate, right? Then they are also very geometric, so because it kind of Persian, Arabic, and sort of ancient Indian mathematics and geometry, all of those things went into sort of the logics of creating Jalis. So both in terms of structure and strength and all of this, and design, of course. So they blended Persian as well as Central Asian style. So you'll see these kinds of Jalis even in like Uzbekistan and Turkmenistan and like Morocco, so wherever you have like Islamic influence, you'll find that, right? But it was also borrowed, but in India they also like use the existing sort of Hindu and Jain sort of traditions. Anyway, so these Mughal Jalis are extensive in that region I showed you. You'll find them from Kabul to Dhaka, from like Kashmir all the way to like the southernmost tip of India, right? So these are both private, public, and funerary structures, right? So this one actually is part of the logo of one of India's most famous institutions, the Indian Institute of Management in Ahmedabad. This is from a tomb in Ahmedabad. Anyway, the other one is called the Rajasthani Jharokha, right? So Rajasthan is probably one of India's most celebrated regions and one of the most visited regions by people from all over the world. So it's a desert state in Western India, and borders, its northern and western borders all along Pakistan, the Sindh province of Pakistan. So the Rajasthani Jharokha, Rajasthan probably has the most evolved style of vernacular architecture in India, I would say. Partly driven by need. So it's very hot, it's very unforgiving, the climate. So it's very climate responsive, and the craftsmanship is exquisite, right? So this was also, and Rajputana, the region of Rajasthan, was also one of the regions that was not directly colonized by the British ever in a way, right? So there were lots of Hindu rulers and kingdoms that still continued. So this kind of blends, so the typical features are these curved canopies and very slender brackets, yeah. The Jharoka is basically like a window, but it's a projecting balcony. So the design sort of architectural term is called an oriel window balcony. So it can be, it's usually not very deep, it's sort of shallow in terms of its length. And it blends Hindu and Islamic styles spanning millennia from ancient India to the Middle East. And usually it allows you to overlook something. So usually overlooks the street, which is a public space, or some other kinds of open space like gardens. So if you go to the state of Rajasthan, you will see most gardens and parks as well as beautiful streets like lined by these kind of Jharokas. And the styles are different in different parts of Rajasthan, but this is very typical. So this is the Jharoka window from Rajasthan. The third one is the Buddhist fenestration, right? I mean, so this is Buddhist window, there's no name for it, but it is most exquisitely sort of represented in probably the monasteries, the gompas, right? And this you can see from everywhere. Now this is very interesting because, say, for example, according to William Dalrymple in his recent book, I think Buddhism is the biggest influence, according to him, that South Asia has had in the rest of the world, So, like on that map that you saw right from the top, which is like this Xinjiang in China, like all the way to like what is close to like Kunming in China on this side, the entire Himalayan region is like Bhutan, Nepal, you know, the mountain states of India, you find this kind of architecture, right? And the architectural sort of Gompa, window or style also influences other kinds of buildings. So this is like a traditional from one of the Rumtek monastery in Sikkim, which is another sort of Himalayan kingdom, Buddhist kingdom, which is a state of India now, over there. And this is a very contemporary building, a very fine restaurant in the capital of Ladakh called Leh. So I took this picture about 2 years ago, right? So I really like this architecture. So this concept is called the Shingsag, okay, the pyramidal form, and that's formed by this sort of layering of materials and sort of projects out both in relief also, so it comes towards you kind of thing. So that's a very distinctive feature of and you can see this impact in lots of other places in China, Japan, etc., the influence of the original sort of thing, right? So it uses mud, timber, stone, slate. These are the materials that are found in the Himalayan region, right? And it is also similar. I don't have a picture of that of the Toran, yeah, the Newari sort of Hindu temple window in a way. Finally, the European influence is the last window that you have. This last window shows many kinds of influences, right? So this is mainly along like the coastal areas of southern India, also going to Sri Lanka, even deep into the Maldives, which is but they are most sort of prominently like evident in, say, the old Jewish settlements of Kerala, which are, so the earliest Jewish settlers supposedly came to Kerala during King Solomon's time. So we're talking about 2 millennia, I think, over here, more than that. So they're still there in Kochi, for example. Then they were the Chettinad mansions, these sort of landlords from Tamil Nadu. Pondicherry, which was a French colony in the southern sort of state of, along the southern state of Tamil Nadu in India. That was French architecture. Then you also have to see this in Goa's Portuguese era buildings. Goa was a Portuguese colony. And then the Dutch dominated sort of Sri Lanka. So you see all of this, right? So this one is from a Jewish synagogue in Kerala, which is still there. This is the Chettinad mansion window. This is one of the Pondicherry windows. And this is interesting. So Goa also had, so it's the things where it was like shallow sort of arches, these radial kind of segments, and these vertical lines that you had on the panes and all. So they used the richer ones use Burmese teak, stained glass, brass hinges, which also shows the European and Southeast Asian artisanal influences. Some of them were actually made in those regions and or they brought the workers from those areas to actually work, like from Southeast Asia. But interestingly, this was something I discovered during this process, that Goa did not have a reliable supply of glass. There was not too many glass builders, glass makers. So what they did was they used oyster shells, which was abundant, right? So they created this iridescent kind of effect inside, so like you can see. So this was not just a substitute for glass, but it was also a better material for the local climate, which is very hot and humid, So so these are local innovations that came about. Okay, finally, as some of you might have noticed, there's a wall beneath that, right? So this is called the Pohaku. This is the stone wall from Hawaii. So the traditional Hawaiian home for the Kanaka, Maori, Kanaka Maori, they lived in hale. So you still see hale, and that's the name for house. But the traditional hale, because of the climate and the weather and the materials, did not really have windows. You didn't need windows in a way. right? But you needed a solid foundation, as we've been experiencing winds and rains, so that stone wall is called the Papohaku, and that does not have any joinery, it does not have any masonry, so it's like you have to be an expert craftsman to figure out how to make that work. Like this gentleman here is a living exponent of that art still. So it takes time, but it's very solid. It's like, it's kind of pyramidal in its profile, so that it uses gravity to put the load in the center of the wall. The center of gravity is kind of very controlled in a way, and then you create the rest of the structure on top of that, right? The Hawai generally doesn't use any nuts, bolts, screws, nothing. It's all made with natural materials. So I thought it was a very apt tribute to Hawaii and Hawaii and Manoa to put our windows on top of a pohaku, give it that solid, stable foundation, right? So anyway, so that was the concept. So also this whole concept was guided by this thing. So this is literally a quote from our mission, the university mission says, the Native Hawaiian place of learning, one that is responsible to all people who call Hawaii home, including but not limited to students, employees, communities, and AINA, which we have heard about a lot since yesterday. For those who are not familiar with Hawaii, by being reflective of Hawaii's foundations, culture, language, history, principles, values, and worldviews that teach us how to best aloha one another and our island home. So in that spirit, I hope that that CSAS always tries to foster an inclusive pursuit of knowledge, and hopefully provides the windows for understanding South Asia and the world a little better. This was just some idea. So it started off with my doodling like that. Then I sketched this hand drawing. So I didn't mention the opening slide, but there's another name there. So this is a doctor of architecture student called Bhargav Kaushik. He's from India, but he's at the School of Architecture. And he and I both are from the very northeastern state of Assam. So we didn't feature any window from our region. Okay. Because these are the more dominant windows. So so anyway, so after I do this by hand, so I'm not very good with all the latest computer sort of gadgetry and technology that is at our disposal. So I relied on Bhargav's talent to digitize it. So then from this he took it to this one. And the other thing we discovered, because then we had a meeting with Nandini, and we discovered that this is quite versatile in a way, because this window thing, because it allowed us to do this thing, which is like a quadriptych, like 4 panel, which you see here, or it could be just vertical in a way, right? So it's very versatile in that way. So each one sits on the papohaku that you see here. Yeah, so that's about it. So there were some references. I didn't book this thing up, so I was actually referring to, so that in case somebody asked us, like, oh, there is actually evidence to back up these claims in a way. So thank you, and Maharos.
Mahalo to you. Thank you so much for the gift. Yeah.
Sorry for the delay. Bit better late than never.
Thank you so much.
So just in case you're wondering why familiar faces are back up here in the front following Ashok's excellent description of our new banner, which should be on t-shirts, and we should have had them for the conference today or next year. Come back, everybody, for your t-shirt. Okay, so to begin with, I just want to acknowledge the land in which we are gathered today, which is the land of the Native Hawaiians. We are here as settlers. I am from a family of immigrants from India and came to Hawaii via Detroit and Alaska. And I live in the neighborhood of Kapahulu, which is in the Ahapua'a of Waikiki. I lived here for many, many years, and I've been working at the university since 1991. In my position as the South Asia Studies Librarian, I'm currently also the chair of our very renowned Asia collection at the library that's you will see on your way to the restrooms on this floor as well as the fourth floor. So come and visit our collections. We also have a beautiful collection on Hawaii and the Pacific on the fifth floor. And I think some of you might have used those collections. So my colleague here, Monisha Gupta from Ethnic Studies, Monisha and I go back a long ways, are here to really talk about a little bit of history. I would say approximately, I think Anandi said 1985, but maybe we'll just talk about the last 20 years or so, Monisha.
Sure.
Monisha's been the director of the center, we work together. I'm sort of the standing member of the Center for South Asian Studies. So I've been there continuously with many different directors. Monisha and I are very committed to a kind of perspective that we want to share as the center. And I'll let Monisha begin actually with that perspective.
Yeah, I feel incredibly fortunate and, also, just incredibly fortunate to be hosted on these lands. I have learned so much from my colleagues. You met a few of them in the course of this conference, and they really kind of influenced my own intellectual journey here as well as my political journey. And I wanted to just again give a shout out to Ashok. I did not know that he was a crypto artist. And Ashok, I've never seen you doodle at a chairs meeting. That might be a good activity to engage in and produce these beautiful things that you do. So,
once I was reprimanded for doing something like that. I resist now.
Goodness. Yeah. So I grew up in Kolkata. My mother is from East Bengal, and they moved to what is now West Bengal before the partition, but they were given out after the partition, and I had the West Bengal, East Bengal thing going on in the two sides of the family. And it's only, even though I study migration, it's only in the last, I would say 15 years that I have, started to articulate the history of my mother's side as a refugee experience, because, once I started to sort of look at refugee studies, critical refugee studies, that's, what I realized. I wanted to sort of, also say that, I succeeded Monica and Shankar as the director, and they had done an incredible amount of work to build up South Asia. As you can see, we don't have a heritage, community here, right? So we don't have, your sort of second generation, or further down South Asian students who are, sort of wanting these courses in South Asia. But what we have is incredible faculty and students who come to study with those faculty. So when I first came here in Ethnic Studies, I have a joint appointment between the Department of Ethnic Studies and Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies. My chair at that time, Dean Alvarado, who has since passed, he was a Filipino diaspora scholar and very much involved in the anti-Marcos movement. He was worried that there was no heritage, community here, and at that time I was, working with progressive South Asian groups in the diaspora, mostly in New York and Boston. And he was like, there are no South Asian taxi drivers here, what are you gonna do? And I found plenty to do. And found my own sort of communities here and my own, ways to remain community engaged. So when when Monica started and we, as director, and we started to, think about what the center can bring to this space, there were two things that we really focused on. One is that, what can our center say about this place that is hosting us? So what would be a place-based South Asian studies, that we can imagine, and then also really highlight in all the work that we do as part of the center. So that was one project. And then the second project was, how can we bring in the diaspora? Because usually when you're doing straight out, South Asian studies, the diaspora is,
Outlier.
Yeah, outlier, definitely a stepsister. So how do we, sort of bridge the area studies and, sort of diaspora studies gap? So these were our two, main projects that, in terms of reshaping, in some ways, the center. Of course, before us, and people like Oliver Chakraborty were, he was the director of the center and brought like an incredible number of post-colonial South Asian scholars through, and really, really exciting projects. So I remember when I came to interview on this campus, this South Asia conference was going on, and somebody was like, Dipesh Chakraborty is on this campus, and I'm like, really? So, we think of this place in the Pacific as a sea of islands, as how Bhargav said, and then, Kamana, we were highlighted. It is actually not isolated. We are so connected to different places in the Pacific. We have, a South Asian diaspora in Fiji, in Australia. So those are, diasporas that we turn to, and New Zealand, of course. We also have incredible intellectual ferment, so which I think you got a taste of in this conference. So that's what.
Yeah, that's pretty much it. And actually, the diaspora thing was really personally interesting to me because that's my area of research. In my master's program, I did the literature of the South Asian diaspora. And I remember at the time, firstly, nobody was collecting material in the library because it's not Asia and it wasn't the general collection. So there was all this kind of, and there's still a scuffle going on right as we speak. But I just started collecting material on that, and I just said, we'll put it in the Asia collection, it's not going to be anywhere else. And what I also noticed at the time, Monisha and I would present at conferences, and there'd be standing room only at the diaspora topic groups, the panels, etc. So there was a shift happening, and an addition to South Asian studies that was being neglected by the sort of disciplinary approach, because diaspora studies, we all know, is very interdisciplinary, right? And I think also in Hawaii it's relevant because the largest community of Native Hawaiians are in the diaspora. Mm-hmm. So, there's a real kind of relational issues there that we should be exploring in greater detail, I think, when we have the opportunity. And if not, at least to be aware of those kinds of relationships. The other thing I think we have tried to really do is to be more South Asia broadly, yes, consciously, intentionally, not India specific, because that does tend to dominate. So we really try to make that effort to be a little bit more conscious and intentional. So, and I hope some of our speakers and the presentations they've done. We also want to bring in the queer element in South Asia. It's in literature, it's in music, it's in theory, it's all over the place. So we've really made our efforts to be inclusive in that way. So I think that's one of the things we also want to engage very much so with our community partners. So I'm not sure if you've been aware, but we have here a very exclusive museum, the Shangri-La Museum of Islamic Art. It is the former home of Doris Duke, of the Duke Empire, Tobacco Empire. And it's very difficult to get in. They have a small window for you to sign up, and it's just not easily accessible. But it's a exclusive but exquisite property with really interesting things. We've done partnerships with them. Our faculty in architecture in the past have served on the board. We are very engaged with our partners. The Honolulu Museum of Art does activities around very popular Bollywood. The Bollywood interest on the islands is incredible, just saying. You know, there's a cashier at the Safeway that recognized my name, and I was like, really? She said, well, you know, there's this artist and this film star, and I said, oh dear, you know, like I'm so out of it. But there's these connections that are, you know, very important to us, and that we build on, that we participate, and we grow. One of the things I just saw our emeritus professor, Rick Jamilius, walk in the door. But one of the things I've always said about in South Asia, that we have all these differences of religion and, you know, all our communalism, but when it comes to music, whoa, there's no difference there, because we love it all. So I just want to say that, you know, we're really aware of those kinds of things. We're trying to bring them together in conversations, and I hope what you will experience today, tomorrow, and yesterday will give you a sense of what it is that we as a faculty here at University of Hawaii is trying to do with our center and the directions we're taking that are different, I feel, than other centers, because I'm on listservs for all the other centers, and they're very South Asia centric, which is fine for where they are and what they're doing, but I just want you to be aware of how we are different. And what I'm hoping is we have returning participants for the symposium, is that you'll see how your work, as you continue to do it, connects with what we're doing, and to return in the future. That's all.
I wanted to just add a couple of things. So, you know, in terms of community, we actually do have a diaspora from Nepal here, and we have a diaspora from Bangladesh. So there are people in the community who, you know, when we used to have pre-COVID Diwali celebrations or something, they would all come together. You know, I see sort of our Swana communities like in protest for Palestine, you know. So that we do have a presence here, even though it is small. And then the other thing is that, you know, under sort of Monica's directorship, we made a commitment to, as much as possible, to take our participants to the Lodi here and to do IDA work. You know, it's so that, you know, we really sort of unlearn this kind of, like, I'm in Hawaii, you know, and that touristic sort of approach to Hawaii. And that has been incredibly enriching for people, just to, you know, even get into that mud, like many of us, like me, it's like mud is like, and you just get in there, and your toes are being sucked in, and you're working with your hands. So I think that those are very, you know, unique experiences that we've been able to offer. Yeah, I'll stop there.
Yeah. So, yeah, that's where we are, and we both welcome you and hope you'll return.